A young man notices a medal at the auction, until he learns that it belongs to the town's secret hero. Before we begin, share in the comments which city you are watching this video from today. The town of Salem, Oregon, was a place hidden among lush forests, where silence and tranquility reigned. In the mornings, the aroma of freshly ground coffee wafted from the coffee shops, mingling with the cool air. In the evenings, people walking under the street lamps never failed to greet one another. It was a small town where everyone knew each other, yet no one truly knew anyone else. Every first Saturday of the month, an event was held in the town center, the Salem Collectibles Auction. Old books, antique clocks, nostalgic lamps, cracked porcelain, and objects that had lost their identity over time found new owners in this hall. The wooden walls of the auction hall creaked as if carrying whispers from the past, drawing those who entered into another time. On every auction day, the same figure would sit in the corner of the back row, a gray-haired man with a slight hunch, his face bearing the marks of time. His name was Thomas Reynolds, but everyone simply called him Uncle Tom. He always wore a neatly pressed, though old, brown jacket, and held a thermos cup of plain coffee in his hand. He never spoke loudly or drew attention to himself. He simply watched, intently. The children teased him gently. "Uncle Tom is watching the past again," they whispered, then laughed. The adults didn't even look at him. He was like the streetlights in the town, seen but not noticed. Over the years, his presence there had become as ordinary as the furniture. But Sarah, the auctioneer, was one of the few people who noticed his silence. She had observed the change in his expression, his eyes lingering on a detail in the window. And there was always a bulge in the inner pocket of his jacket. A notebook? Maybe a letter? No one had asked. Until that day. It was an unusually cool Saturday in July 2025. The sky was covered in gray clouds. The auction hall was packed with its usual weekly crowd. The air was heavy with a nostalgic dampness. People wandering among the shelves filled with old items were searching for traces of the past. Uncle Tom was sitting in his usual spot at the back, sipping his coffee slowly. His eyes scanned the room attentively, but his body was almost motionless. His face bore a tired yet peaceful expression. At that moment, one of the young people wandering through the room, 17-year-old Ethan, pushed through the crowd and headed toward the display cases. He didn't actually have a particular interest in antiques, but something instinctive drew him to that box. It was a small, dusty box. Inside was a faded medal bearing the wear of the years. There were barely legible words on it, "Silver Star." Next to it was a short note written by hand on a yellowed piece of paper, "Unknown Hero." Ethan narrowed his eyes. He didn't fully understand what it was, but this object was different from the others. There was something deep in that note, an inexplicable weight. He raised his hand. "I want this," he said aloud, pointing his finger at the medal. The auction was about to begin. The crowd had fallen silent, glancing at the bidding boards, and the silence in the room deepened for a moment. At that moment, Tom's hands trembled in the back row. His eyes locked on the medal. His face froze. He gently placed his coffee cup on the table. No one thought he would recognize that small box. But he did. His eyes welled up for a moment, but he said nothing. Sarah looked at Tom. In that moment, she sensed that something had changed. This quiet man had opened the door to another era with a secret he had carried for years. The heavy atmosphere in the auction hall suddenly shifted. The medal inside the dusty box was not just a memento. In that moment, it was a silent yet powerful touch from the past to the present. And like everyone else, Tom would not just watch that day, perhaps for the first time. As the sound of the auctioneer's hammer filled the room, Ethan's heart raced with an odd excitement. Despite his young age, something about that medal had deeply affected him. While others bid on old chairs, clocks, and paintings, he couldn't take his eyes off that small box. When the auctioneer called out, "Starting bid, $30." Ethan raised his hand without hesitation. No one else bid against him. Perhaps no one else knew what that faded medal meant. Perhaps they didn't care. Sold. For $50 to the young gentleman, the auctioneer declared. Ethan walked quietly onto the stage. He picked up the box with both hands, handling it as carefully as if it were a fragile treasure. As he turned back, he curiously opened the box. He took the medal in his hand. Its shine had faded, but the engraving was still clear, Silver Star, T. Reynolds. Ethan's eyebrows furrowed. As his eyes scanned the room, his gaze involuntarily fell on the man in the back row. The gray-haired man adjusting his jacket collar, placing his empty coffee cup on the table. Uncle Tom. The young man cleared his throat. He took a few steps, then stopped. He took a deep breath and gathered his courage. "Sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This medal, is it yours? Are you T. Reynolds?" Tom's face froze for a moment. His eyes locked on Ethan's, but there was no trace of anger. In the depths of his pupils, a weary sadness mingled with sorrow. "Yes," he said. His voice was hoarse, almost worn away by time. "But those days are long gone." Ethan looked at the medal in his hand again. "This silver star," he said hesitantly. "What does it mean? What happened there?" His voice was filled with curiosity but also respect. Tom did not answer. He simply narrowed his eyes and looked at the medal. The corners of his lips trembled. A fleeting light flashed in his eyes, then quickly faded. He didn't place his hand on Ethan's shoulder, didn't say anything. He just bowed his head slightly. The subject was closed. But for Ethan, nothing was over. That night, as he returned home, he was consumed with thoughts. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. His fingers began moving swiftly across the keyboard, Vietnam Silver Star T. Reynolds. At first, there were no results. Then, an old newspaper clipping and a few military archive records appeared. Most of the information was censored. But one report mentioned a special rescue operation that took place in Vietnam in 1969. This sentence caught his attention. A sergeant who infiltrated an enemy-held area and rescued 12 soldiers. Name redacted, T.R. In another document he quickly reviewed, the hero's name was listed as Thomas Reynolds. His heart began to race. His fingers trembled. He looked at the screen again. There was no photo, but the details were clear. A sergeant awarded the Silver Star had single-handedly entered a deadly area to save his unit. Uncle Tom was that man. The man sitting quietly in the corner, not speaking to anyone, looking as though he had disappeared into an old coat, had once saved lives. And now, having left his past behind, he sat quietly at auctions, hiding his identity. Ethan sank into his chair. He placed his head between his hands. A mix of admiration and heavy curiosity gnawed at him. Why had this man chosen to remain silent? Why had that medal been left to gather dust in a box? And why didn't anyone recognize him? That night, Ethan felt the urge to pursue something for the first time. Because some stories were doomed to be forgotten if they weren't told. And some heroes only came back to life when someone remembered them. The next morning, the streets of Salem were just beginning to come alive. Bird songs mingled with the gentle breeze, shop owners were cleaning their windows, and the scent of fresh bread wafted from the bakeries. But Ethan's mind was elsewhere. After a sleepless night, he set off for the auction house with the medal in hand. As he entered the hall, his eyes immediately drifted to the back row. There he was. Uncle Tom, as usual. He was quietly sipping his coffee, carefully examining the items on display. His old face seemed expressionless, but there was a familiar calmness in his gaze. It was as if he could hear everything around him, yet belonged to nothing. Ethan walked toward Tom, clutching the box tightly in his hand. When he reached him, there was a brief silence. Then the young man took a deep breath. "Sir," he said, his voice no longer trembling as it had the day before, but still carrying a sense of respect. "This medal tells the story of your heroism. Why are you hiding it?" Tom slowly raised his head. His eyes were filled with that distant, past-buried expression again. He paused for a moment, then murmured in a hoarse voice, as if talking to himself. "Some people want to forget. Because remembering means reliving. But some memories cannot be erased. Never." Ethan took the silver star out of the box and held it out toward Tom. "This is yours. It should be with you. Because it's not just a medal, it's a life story." Tom looked at the medal for a few seconds. Then he gently took it with his fingers, bowed his head, placed it back in its box, and put it in his jacket pocket. A mist appeared in his eyes. He didn't thank him or say anything else. But in that moment, Ethan understood everything. On the same day, what Ethan had told everyone spread throughout the town. First his friends, then the shop owners, and finally the local library staff. Everyone began talking about old Tom. The mockery gave way to curiosity, and curiosity gave way to admiration. Auctioneer Sarah also heard these rumors. She was one of those who wanted to learn the truth about Tom's past. After the auction ended that evening, she opened the dusty archives in her office. She spent hours researching old newspaper clippings, municipal records, and digitized military documents. Finally, she found a short but striking passage in the 1969 Vietnam War reports. Corporal Thomas Reynolds, during an operation in the Hue region, he rescued his unit under heavy machine gun fire, safely transporting 12 soldiers to a secure area without endangering their lives. Despite being wounded himself, he completed his mission. He was awarded the Silver Star. The name was clear. He was the man. The quiet, unassuming Tom Reynolds, whom no one had truly known for years. Sarah wiped away her tears, sat down at her desk, and decided to write a letter. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, we have come to understand the heroism behind your silence. The town of Salem is now proud not only of your past but also of your present. Your story is not just a symbol of a war, but of humanity. With respect. Sarah, Salem Collectibles." The next day, she put the letter in an envelope and left it on the table where Tom was sitting. Tom took the letter, folded it, and read it. He remained silent for a long time. Then a weary but sincere smile appeared at the corners of his lips. Perhaps for the first time in years. That smile was the only victory left from the war. Understanding. Tom Reynolds' story began to spread through the cobblestone streets of Salem in whispers. First the town's young people talked about it, then the shop owners, and finally the elders. Learning that a hero lay behind the silent years had stirred something within everyone. Tom was no longer just a regular at the auction, he had become a living symbol representing the town's connection to its past. A week later, the Salem VFW Hall, the local Veterans Association, held a special ceremony. Old photographs were displayed, the American flag was raised, and speeches were made one after another in front of the small stage. The hall was filled with excitement and reverence. Ethan had been invited to speak at the ceremony. When he stepped up to the microphone, his hands trembled, but his voice was steady. Uncle Tom, or Sergeant Thomas Reynolds. He may not have spoken for years, but he carried an army within his silence. He was someone to be admired not only in war but also in peace. When Ethan finished speaking, an elderly man rose from the crowd. His hair was snow-white, and his gait was slow. He wore an old unit insignia on the collar of his shirt. His right arm was slightly limp, but his posture was proud. "I know him," he said loudly. "In 1969, he saved us from death in the middle of Vietnam. The unit had disintegrated, and we were surrounded by the enemy. That night, we thought no one would survive, but he came. He walked through the fire and pulled us out." The room fell silent. Then the slow applause grew into a roar of enthusiastic respect that filled the entire hall. In that moment, a long-forgotten past was brought back to life and given the respect it deserved. Tom hadn't attended the ceremony. Maybe he still preferred silence. Maybe all that attention was against his nature. But the next day, at the auction, everything was different. People greeted him, bowing their heads when they made eye contact. Tom found this unfamiliar attention strange at first, but then accepted it. Ethan had arrived at the hall early in the morning. He held a special glass box in his hand. Inside, the metal rested on a carefully placed piece of velvet fabric. A small plaque was placed in front of the box. Corporal Thomas Reynolds, Silent Hero. Tom stared at the box for a long time. Then he turned to Ethan. His eyes were moist, but there was a slight smile on his face. "Maybe, the medal never disappeared," he said. "It was just waiting for its place." From that day on, the glass box was placed at the entrance to the auction hall. People came to look at the medal, hear its story, and sometimes stood silently before it in respect. Tom was no longer just Uncle Tom in the town. Some called him Hero. Children wanted to sit by his side, and the elderly sought opportunities to share their past memories with him. But Tom didn't change. He still got the same coffee every morning and sat in the same spot. Only now, his silence was fuller. It had meaning. One day, Ethan entered the hall and saw Tom's table empty. There was only a note on the table, written in Tom's handwriting. Silence doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes, memories just can't be put into words. The story doesn't end here. Because some people tell everything not with words, but with their lives. And some heroes carry humanity on their shoulders, not medals. Have you ever met someone like Tom? Someone who quietly does heroic deeds? Maybe they're sitting in a corner. Maybe you haven't noticed them yet.